Welcome to Decision Analyst Insider Series webinar on the fundamentals of packaging research. My name is Christy Allen and I'm the Marketing Director at Decision Analyst. If you have any questions, please feel free to type in the chat box. We'll attempt to answer as many questions as we can. Today's presenters are Jerry Thomas. He's President and CEO of Decision Analyst. And also Tom Allen is co-presenting. He's a Vice President at Decision Analyst. And with that, I will hand the presentation over to Jerry.
Thanks, Christy, and I'm Jerry, and welcome to today's webinar. Tom and I will go through this pretty quickly and hopefully have some time for questions at the end. If you look at the importance of packaged goods in our economy, it's really significant. We estimate that somewhere between 18 and 22% of all of economic activity involves packaging of some type. Boxes, cartons, bottles, tubes, cloaks, wraps. It's a whole range of different types of packaging. And when we think about packaging research, there are really two types of packaging research. One is on the basic form of the package, and whether, is it a bottle, and what shape bottle, or a plastic tube, and what shape tube, and how big, those kinds of questions, or on the design elements, the marketing and advertising aspects of packaging. And today we're going to be focused primarily on the package design, or the package graphics, perhaps is more accurate. That is the marketing and the communications part of packaging rather than the packaging form itself.
And Jerry, I think that's an important distinction as well. When clients often contact me and they say they want to discuss packaging research, we do have to go through that step of saying, okay, well, what exactly are you thinking about making changes to your packaging? And that leads us down the proper avenue.
We live in a changing world, as you know, and the pace of change seems to continue to accelerate. The economy's changing it all the time. The retail distribution is changing. Consumer norms and mores are changing. And, of course, technology is changing very rapidly. So in a world of change, it's quite logical to think that, okay, it's time to take that old tried and true package that we have and update the design or redesign the package graphics. And that's one situation that calls for a new package design. Or it might be that the lab has developed this great new product and it's time to design the package for this new product. And in a world of perfect worlds, the manufacturer and the marketing group and the president of the company would always have a perfect and clear vision of exactly what the new package design should be and what it should communicate. But rarely is this the case. So very often, the package designer is left with either no direction or confused directions or clouded directions. So the package design process can be complicated and difficult from that standpoint. And most commonly, if you look at all of the packages out on all the shelves, most package redesigns never go through any type of formal marketing research evaluation process. The typical process is a group of senior executives sit around the table, look at preliminary package designs, reduce the number. The package designers go back and make changes, and it's an iterative process. And after a few weeks, they've ended up with the final package design, and that decision in many, many cases is based purely on human judgment. And of course, the stage is set everyone's hopeful for a great marketing breakthrough on the positive side. This is a new package design is going to increase sales, and everyone is very excited.
Absolutely.
But sometimes it doesn't exactly turn out as hoped and expected, because changing the package design for an established existing product is quite dangerous and very often leads to marketing disaster. And Tom's going to go through some examples of that in just a minute. If it's an existing package and you change the design and sales go down, there's really no place to hide. Everyone starts looking at the brand manager and the package designer, and you're in big trouble. But if it's a new product, you're much safer, because most companies don't do a very good job of post-mortem research when a new product fails. So the brand manager and the package designer are very likely to get off scot-free in the case of a totally new package design. But the main point that I wanted to make on this slide is that redesigning the package, and we'll make this point several times because it's so important, is a very risky proposition.
Absolutely. On the plus side, there's always opportunities to improve your sales and improve your brand, but there's lots of risks, as Jerry alluded to. So we're going to share 3 examples of redesigns today that did not turn out so well for these particular brands. There's many, many more out there. Hopefully you don't have any of your own that you can think of, but we're going to go through these particular 3. And Tropicana orange juice is our first example. It's a great example of risks that are involved in making changes, packaging changes to an existing brand. And this is a well-known brand. It's been heavily supported. This particular redesign failure happened in 2009. Consumers were used to seeing the original package on the shelves, so the one that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. And it's an iconic image of an orange with the straw in it, indicating freshness, that you're getting the juice straight from the orange. It's got a very bold logo. The brand name is very prominent. You can easily identify what that product is selling and what brand is on that product. And they redesigned it, as I said, in 2009. And in my opinion, the redesigned package on the right is actually an attractive package, but it has some drastic differences from the original package. And we would assume that this confused consumers, because the net result was that sales fell about 20%. It wound up costing Tropicana about $50 million in the end. And some of the issues with the redesign package have to do with the fact that the product image changed. So we went from an image of a fruit or the orange to an image of, actually it's a partial image, because the image of the glass of orange juice wraps around off of the product primary facing, the front facing. They've also changed not only the logo, but slightly the color, as well as the alignment of the brand name. So they've made some pretty dramatic changes to the package. And again, I would say it's an attractive package, but it's confusing to consumers because it makes some pretty significant changes from what they had originally. Now, this could be a case, and I'll just touch on this real quickly. It could be a case where brand managers, much as Jerry alluded to, they made that package design change on their own. Perhaps it was supported by some research and they decided to disregard the research. We really don't know, but hopefully research would have guided them along the path that there are some elements of that redesign that consumers are not going to respond to very well. And so our second example is Miracle Whip. And Miracle Whip is a brand that's near and dear to my heart. I grew up on it. I used to call it mayonnaise when I was growing up, even though it's clearly not mayonnaise. But it was my very favorite, still is to this day, my favorite salad or sandwich spread, I should say. So the original package that you see on the left had been on the market for years. The branding and the imagery that's associated with the brand has been widely recognized by consumers. This particular package redesign also occurred around 2009, so similar to what happened with Tropicana. The redesign package, you could say, is more simplistic, maybe even more clean, if you wish. But unfortunately, it didn't stand out on grocery shelves as much as the original package. Even some reviewers later described it as a bland, almost generic type of a package facing. So it wasn't doing Kraft any benefits. It wasn't doing the brand any benefits. And as a result, sales declined. Kraft wound up changing the package relatively quickly after the redesign came out in favor of one that was more similar to the original and would also stand out on shelves more. And so again, we just have to ask ourselves, were there red flags that were raised by research that was either ignored or disregarded by brand teams or the marketing team? Again, we don't know, but we would hope that there would, especially with a company like Kraft, that there would be some research that went into that package redesign, and for some reason it still was put on the shelves, but it didn't do the brand any benefits.
And I would bet, this is Jerry, I would bet money that Kraft is a really well-managed company and has been, and have many great researchers have come out
Absolutely.
of Kraft. And I would expect that they did the research, that they had the information, and then it got overruled at a higher level in the company. That would be my guess about what happened.
Very possible, yeah. And so our third example is for Animal Planet, and this isn't a package redesign example per se, but it does talk about logo changes. And as we know, logos are integral to packages. They share a lot of similarities between the two topics, and so it's pertinent to our discussion today. And the original logo on the left combines both imagery, and you've got the elephant as well as the globe of the planet, along with the text that complements or supports those images that you see. And it's a simple, clean, understandable logo. When you look at the redesigned logo on the right, intuitively there's no imagery there, so there's no complementary benefit between the image and the text. It's more confusing because you've got the sideways M, so it's not, you can read it, but it's not as readily identifiable as the Animal Planet original logo. And so again, decisions like these can often be the result of human emotions coming into play. We know emotions can alter our decision making. The process that we go through, it can affect outcomes in negative ways, as we've seen here. So just as a case in point, be aware of your emotions when you're making these types of decisions and understand that there is a place for them, obviously, because we want to be proud, we want to be happy about the redesigns that we do, whether it's packaging or logos. We want to have that support internally for it, but you have to temper that with research and input as well. Don't just rely on your judgments.
There's a tendency for package designers and for marketing executives to fall in love with a particular design or approach. And, and the old saying, love is blind, is so true. And once the designers or the marketing team falls in love with a design, they're very often likely to try to override any research results or discount any research results to choose, to favor their emotional preference.
And I'm sure you have examples of that happening, Jerry. I've heard, I've experienced stories at other companies that I worked with that had that very same thing happen. So there was a choice that was on the table, research was conducted, and the manager in charge decided to go with their own gut instinct instead of listening to the research and the input of others, which leads us straight into flaws about judgment. So on topic. We've mused that judgment may have hurt these brands that we just saw those three examples for, and here are some flaws that really we all need to watch out for. We pick on marketing executives here on this particular slide, but these are flaws that apply to all of us. Clearly, if we were perfect, I wish I was, I'm not, we would have flawless judgment, right, Jerry? Life would be grand, disasters wouldn't happen, we'd all be skipping and dancing and living a great life. But it's really difficult for anyone to see perfectly through consumers' eyes. We have these built-in mythologies or biases that we're all subject to. We may think we know what we need to know already, so why do we need to go out and get additional input? I already know what my consumers want. maybe we think we're representative of the target market, and I'm probably guilty of this as much as anyone, putting myself, say, yes, that target consumer is me, I am them, and therefore what I think makes sense to everybody that's in that audience. Rarely is that ever the case. Oftentimes we may keep ourselves too insulated from the marketplace. We don't go out and get that full exposure. So I would challenge everyone to make sure when you're thinking about the decisions and the impact of those decisions, go out and do some experiential data gathering on your own. Go to the store, go to the website, visit these, talk to consumers in the aisle. It doesn't have to be research, it can just be a casual conversation. But go out and experience some of these things so that you're not as insulated. But again, the bottom line is emotions can impact our decisions negatively. Could research help with this? Could research temper our own judgment? And quite often, marketing research can offer great insights. We work for a marketing research company. Maybe that's a bias of our own. But I would say in almost every case, marketing research is going to benefit your own internal judgment. Whether it supports it, whether it casts doubt on it, it's going to be useful to you in almost every case. But market research isn't perfect either. It has its own pitfalls. It's got its own blind spots. One of the biggest is that consumer research tends to favor the status quo. So if we have an existing package, in this case, that's familiar to consumers, it's been on the market, it's been on the shelves for a while, consumers are used to seeing it, they expect to see it on the shelves. Oftentimes when we're testing that existing status quo package against new package designs, and the more radical a design, the more likely the impact is going to be consumers want to stay with that original package. And this is especially so among our own brand's consumers, because again, they're the ones that are most interacting with that package on the shelves. This is going to impact them the most, and so most times they will pick the existing package over new package designs. So that's kind of a primary one. Other pitfalls that we need to be aware of when we're thinking about conducting research: who are we going to be sampling? So who are our respondents in the survey? What study design are we going to employ, and is it the right study design? How do we phrase the questions? How do we phrase the answer choices? Do we give them answer choices, or do we just let them respond off the top of their head? How do we interpret the analysis and the data on the back end? There's all sorts of biases that can be built into any of those steps, and so we just have to be aware of them and be very careful and cautious about them. Now, there are opportunities for experienced researchers, maybe some folks with some gray hairs and some wrinkles, that could help us avoid those pitfalls because they've presumably have managed to evade them in the past. But definitely experienced researchers will help you make sure that you're phrasing the questions the right way, that you're approaching the methodology correctly, and that you're doing the right things. So I would say research that is done well will support and improve your decision-making capabilities.
So in the beginning, it's a good place to start is the beginning. So if a package design or redesign is coming, there are a number of steps that we typically recommend and suggest before the package designers start work on packages. And this is some of the most important research that you will do in the whole package design process. So it's really important to review any recent research, and it needs to be recent because remember, packaging is changing all the time. So it has to be relatively recent research related to the current package or to competitive packages or to the proposed package design. So let's review what we already know or information that we already have. If possible, some type of research to observe or simply go out and do it yourself, but it has to be done for a substantial period of time. And sometimes it can be done with cameras, but observe consumers shopping your category in a real representative retail environment. Mm-hmm. There are all kinds of questions that potentially can be answered. Are they reading the ingredient statement? How long are they spending in front of the dairy case? How many packages do they look at before they make a choice? There are all these bits of information that could help inform the package design process. Likewise, how is that package used in the home? What's the life of that package once it arrives and passes through the front door of the home? Does it sit out on the shelf where it's an advertising billboard for a week, or does it go to the bottom of the freezer and you only look at it for 10 seconds while you're ripping the box open 3 weeks later? Because all of these things relate to how the package might be designed and shaped by the way the product is used in the home. And then increasingly, on number 4, so many products are being either partially sold or distributed online that and the package design that might work best at retail might not be the optimal package design for an online portrayal of the product. So we've got to bring those consideration into the package design process. Before the package design process begins, we typically recommend depth interviews. Depth interviews are much better than focus groups. Qualitative is much better than almost any type of quantitative research. And again, the purpose of this pre-package design research is to set package design goals and guidelines so that we are providing a good, solid direction to the package designers. That increases the chances that we're going to end up with a successful redesign of the package. But in those depth interviews, there are many, many questions that we want to answer. But it's virtually everything we can think about that relates to that packaging. When we start talking to consumers about packaging in that category, can they recall and describe the package designs to us? Or what elements of the package can they recall spontaneously? Are they aware of the brand names in the category, or do they choose based on the color pattern on the shelf? And what attitudes and perceptions and motives are involved in their brand decision process? So I won't go through all of these questions, but you see the kinds of questions that depth interviews, and the reason I say depth interviews rather than focus groups, because focus groups, there's too much mutual biasing and education going on in groups. Mm-hmm. When one person in the group describes from recall the retail package, then everyone in the group knows what the package looks like. But without that one person, no one would have known what that package looked like. So we really want to isolate and talk to people one-on-one in depth interviews to serve as a precursor for the package design process itself. And then during those depth interviews, at the very end, we'll want to go through the current package and have the consumer look at every panel or facing on that package and have them react to it in great detail. And that will provide all kinds of ideas about how we can tweak and improve the package. Typically, the package design process looks like this creative funnel that we've created here. And it would typically, assuming that the package design group, our preliminary research that we just summarized, and the objectives that we set guides the development of perhaps as many as 20 to 30 early stage package designs. I have been involved in projects where we had 50 early stage package designs. So there's no real limit to the number at this stage.
You may want to limit it somewhat.
Well, I
for
think
practical reasons.
Yeah, from a practical standpoint, it helps if we can narrow it down based on judgment. But it can spin out of control at this stage. But generally, you have a lot of package design options at this very early stage. Sometimes you can reduce those based on judgment. But it also, we can use screening, and I'll go through those techniques in a moment. And then once you go through that initial screening, you're at kind of the second level, is what we call the mid-stage of package design. And you may be down to as few as 4 to 8 or 5 to 10 packages at this level. And then at the final stage, hopefully we've reduced it down to the 2 or 3 best package designs. Now, anywhere in this creative funnel, anywhere in this process, we can layer in qualitative research if we need it to answer questions that pop up, or we discover unresolved issues. And so just keep that in mind, that this is kind of, as I talk through this research process, that we can add in qualitative research as needed. So early stage screening, and let's assume we have 20 or 30 preliminary early stage package designs. We typically will screen these with a quantitative approach, a survey-based method, and the research design is dependent. And by dependent, I mean that each respondent sees all 10 packages or all 20 packages or all 30 packages. And that's what I mean by a dependent design. And the kinds of, and we typically have them go through and look at all of the designs, and then on the second time through, and these would of course be in randomized or rotated order to minimize position and order biases, and we would have the respondents, the target audience, consumers, rate each package on 4 or 5 things, no more. Typically attention value, purchase interest based on the design, some type of uniqueness measure that is dissimilarity to competitive packages, some question about fit or compatibility with the brand itself, and sometimes we might add in image projected, but typically this comes later in the process. Right. So these 4 or 5 key measures we would combine into a scoring model to rank all of the package designs. And the reason a scoring model is important is because we've asked 4 or 5 questions, and if you leave it up to the marketing team, they will tend to put a lot more emphasis on the one variable that favors their design. So they tend to cherry pick the results. So it's a great idea, put them together in a scoring model and give them one number for each package design. And now we've reduced that number of designs from 20 or 30 or even more down to a smaller, more manageable number.
Right. It's a very efficient system to call that list, like you said.
Right, to cull it down. So at this mid-stage screening, we may be down to as few as 4, as many as 8 packages, give or take a little bit. And we have 2 basic approaches that we can take at this mid-stage screening or this mid-stage review. We could go back to qualitative, and again, we would want to use depth interviews or one-on-one interviews. And the value of the qualitative approach is the richness and the depth of the diagnostic information and all of the ideas that we would develop about how to improve the package designs that have survived to this point. So that's the power of the qualitative approach. The downside of the qualitative is that it's not as predictive of the final result as a more survey-based or quantitative method would be. And if we do, so the other approach is we just use a survey-based monadic screening of these surviving package designs at the mid-stage, and we go through a lot of the same questions of tension value, purchase intent, uniqueness of the package design, maybe some information about the type of brand image projected, and of course several open-ended questions to give us more diagnostic feedback to improve the final design. So we have two different approaches that we can use. The survey-based approach doesn't give us the diagnostics are not as good as the suggestions for improvement are not as good as the qualitative, but the fact that it's structured and that we have larger sample size makes the results more predictive of the final outcomes. And then we're getting down now to maybe 2 or 3 packages that have survived the whole design process, and those packages have been improved continuously as we've worked through this research and design process. And so typically for the final research, we would use a monadic package design. That is, each respondent would see one package design and no more. Now, we would look at that package design first in the context of a competitive set of packages, but we would only have one test package in each cell of the research, and that's why we refer to it as a monadic design. And we would want to have the major competitive packages in the early stages of that research as a control or a competitive control. Typically, we'd work with sample sizes anywhere from 3 to 500. And if it's really, really important, it's a $1 billion product category, we may scale that up to 1,000 interviews. So this final research, again, we'd be using some of the measures that I mentioned earlier, like attention value and purchase intent. We would also include purchase frequency and the uniqueness measures and brand fit, perhaps even category fit. We would want detailed information about the brand image projected. We would add in questions about pricing and pricing expectations. And then we would add in measures related to the original design objectives if those had not already been covered by existing questions. And then, of course, we would want to leave in and include our open-ended diagnostic questions. And then the results to the key questions would be fed into a mathematical model to estimate the overall sales effectiveness or selling power of each of the final packages. And if we want to get fancy, there's some additional things we can add in or layer in on top of these primary measures that we just covered. We could add in physiological measures such as eye tracking or LFAC or facial action coding, facial coding. We can add in other neuroscience measures. We can add in timed exposure as another method. And all of these add cost. But if it's a really important decision or if there are issues that you don't think you can resolve with the basic measures, then these measures can be added in atop the other basic measures. Also, we can add in, a fly-in to a store, to stop at a shelf set, and then have an interactive shelf set in the store to portray the packages, and this shelf set can be interactive so that we can take consumers through multiple simulated shopping experiences. This adds a lot of cost. Many times you don't really need to take it to this level, but if it's really important, or if you have a lot of issues that you want to explore, like pricing and number of facings related to the packaging, then the simulated shelf set can be very effective. And because we can hide choice modeling experiments within those simulated shelf sets. Then finally, sometimes when you're making a change, especially if it's a big change in packaging, it might create an expectation that the product itself has changed. So in those cases, if it's an established product, you may want to do an in-home usage test with half of the products being in the old package and half a sample in the new package to see if the package design is somehow implicitly affecting perceptions of the product underlying.
Which brings us to the topic of the dangers, and we've touched on these before, but obviously changing packaging brings with it inherent dangers, right? And we know that established brands really must take the greatest care. So what we would advise is, especially for those established brands, don't make radical changes and risk losing your customers. We would point out that the Tropicana orange juice was a more radical change, and unfortunately it did cost them in sales and in revenue, lost revenue. So clearly the higher your market share, the greater you're at risk if you're making radical changes to your packaging. We're not talking about making minor changes. We encourage brands to update, refresh, make those minor changes and improve the look of their brand, make sure that it's current in the minds of consumers. But those radical changes are where your dangers really lie. And so, what are we talking about when we talk about radical changes? So again, think back to the Tropicana orange juice example. If you're changing packaging colors, if you're changing color schemes, so entire color schemes, maybe even changing the font types for your brand or your labeling that you're doing, the brand layout, those types of things, those visual cues that consumers rely on, because when they go to the shelf set, that's really what they're doing, is they're using that part of their brain to select the products that they're used to purchasing. So the more of those visual cues that you're changing at once, the greater you're at risk. And again, this is applicable to existing brands primarily, and the higher your market share, the greater your risk is going to be. Now, if we support those changes, if we alert consumers to those changes ahead of time via advertising, social media, those types of things, then that's going to lessen that risk, because we're educating them, we're communicating to them that these changes are coming, and it in fact might drive them to the store to look for them. Maybe they're excited about these changes and they want to see what that actual package looks like. I would just say lastly though, consider what impact your package redesign is going to have on the perceptions of the product that's in the packaging. And Jerry alluded to this with his recommendation about if we're making those types of changes, maybe we do some in-home use product testing, because we could be changing up our messaging, we could be changing up the imagery that we're using, and it's creating a new mindset for consumers. Maybe it's a more premium packaging, and so they think it's a more premium experience. And if the product doesn't convey that premium experience, then there's going to be a disconnect and they could be dissatisfied. So really think about, are these package redesign changes going to help us or hurt us in the minds of consumers? And so, kind of the last point here that I want to touch on is, as we know, the retail shelf, and by extension the virtual shelf as well, they're constantly changing, right? So these retail shelves and virtual shelves are the battlefields where we as brands face our competitors, where we present ourselves to our consumers. So as important as that is, we need to make sure that we're periodically reviewing our packaging, as well as that of our competitors. Are they making changes that we thought about but we discarded, or are there things that they're doing that we may need to consider implementing or counteracting ourselves. So make that review a part of a process for evaluating the brand as a whole. And it's not to say that that review process necessitates making packaging changes, but at least you're effectively reviewing it on a regular basis. And so we can't strive enough how important it is that you understand how invaluable your packaging is to the success of your brand. In many cases, it could be the only interaction that consumers are having with your brand. It is the marketing for the brand. We know that consumers make decisions at the shelf all the time. They change brands, they look at price points. So your packaging, especially if it's a brand that's not being well supported with advertising dollars, that packaging has to sell the brand. And so we just want to make sure that we understand that we take that into consideration, and that we are maximizing the impact that our packaging and therefore our brand has on consumers at the shelf.
So we've talked a lot about the downside risk of changing package design, but I'd like to end on a positive note that it's also an opportunity to create positive momentum for a brand, because if we can win that competitive battle, that visual battle, that communication battle at the point of purchase, the retail shelf, and increasingly online, we perhaps can then achieve, the ultimate promise and the potential of good packaging research. And packaging research and packaging optimization is more important now in most packaged goods categories than it was 30 years ago or 40 years ago or 50 years ago, because most CPG brands are not supported with as much media advertising today as they used to be. So the packaging has to carry a bigger share of the marketing communication burden. So packaging and optimizing that packaging is one way to win in this absence of media advertising world that we tend to be living in. So thank you very much for attending today's webinar on package design or package graphics design. Do we have any questions, Tom, that have come in during our session?
Well, and I want to be sensitive, Jerry, to folks who joined us online today to watch the webinar. I know we're running real close to our time, but there is one question here that I see that I thought we might want to address. And that question is, does eye tracking add value to a package study or not? What do you think about that?
So eye tracking is widely used and commonly used in package design research. And very often it can help pinpoint some of the parts of the packaging that attract initial attention. There are a couple of limitations, though, of eye tracking. One is where the eye, we know where the eye is pointing with eye tracking, but we don't know what the eye is seeing, because you can look at something and not see it. So that's one limitation of eye tracking. And then there are other limitations also. The human eye is extremely fast at perceiving visual elements. I mean, we can see things almost instantly. So within a second, the eye can look at many different places on a package and actually see all of them, because the eye reacts so quickly. So again, at what point do you say, okay, that's what we want to measure? Because by the end of a second, the eye has moved all over a package. So what is it really looking at? So I think there are times when it's very valuable and should be included, but there are limitations to that method as
Okay.
well.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think that brings us to our allotted time. Christy, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Jerry and Tom, for today's presentation. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's Insider Series webinar. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to email Jerry or Tom. We have not yet scheduled our next Insider Series webinar, so in the meantime, please feel free to register for our email newsletter, and there you can read about our blogs or view our educational videos and keep up to date on our next webinar. And thank you again for attending, and have a wonderful rest of the day.